In terms of establishing a philosophy for the structure of a society, no document is more important in American history than the Declaration of Independence. A quick recap of the decade or so prior to the signing of the Declaration begins with the end of the French and Indian War in 1763 and the Proclamation of 1763, which forbade Americans from crossing the Appalachian Mountains into the Ohio River Valley. American colonists were understandably upset that they had sacrificed to ensure victory in the war, and now King George III, 3,000 miles away, was depriving them of their spoils. In 1764, Parliament passed the Sugar Act, then the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, and the Townshend Acts. With each new tax and regulation on the colonists, anger and resentment towards the Crown and Parliament grew. Extreme tension finally turned to violence with the massacre in Boston in 1770. The Tea Act led to an immediate response by Bostonians and the Tea Party, which in turn led to the Intolerable Acts in 1774. The first shots of the war were fired at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, and following the rejection of the Olive Branch Petition, reconciliation was no longer an option. The Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776. Under the direction of the Virginia House of Burgesses, Delegate Richard Henry Lee proposed the following resolution. Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. That they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. That it is expedient forthwith to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances. That a plan of confederation be prepared and transmitted to the respective colonies for their consideration and approbation. Lee's resolution was adopted on July 2nd, and Thomas Jefferson was tasked with crafting the final declaration. Jefferson crafted one of the most stunning and eloquent documents that had ever been written. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. In the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson makes the case that the people of the United Colonies must state their reasons for separating from Great Britain, that a decent respect to the opinions of mankind makes it necessary and proper to issue a statement as to why they are taking the action to declare their independence. This separation has become necessary because the government of Britain denied the colonists the equal rights to which they are entitled under natural law. As shown in the previous section, the American colonists believed that the King and Parliament had abused their relationship by denying the colonists representation within the British Parliament and by ignoring their grievances. They at this point have no choice but to declare their independence and take their separate and equal station among the other sovereign nations of the earth. The second paragraph begins to justify the separation with an appeal to the philosophies of natural rights as espoused by the Enlightenment era philosophers, namely John Locke. The first line of this second paragraph is one of the most cited and most important statements in the history of man. It has been echoed by revolutionaries and freedom fighters and those who sought a better life through equal treatment. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The statements contained within the document do not have to be explained. Every man who has ever lived understands them to his very core. All men are born with the same rights. These rights cannot be separated from them. They cannot be taken away. Just 3 of them, albeit 3 of the most important, are the right to live, the right to do as you believe is best for you and your family, and the right to seek your own happiness. As with just about any argument related to rights, there are some caveats. Liberty may be taken by the state as punishment for crimes. Life may be ended for certain crimes, such as murder, treason, or desertion, and at one time, rape was a capital crime. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness do not mean that others' rights may be trampled on in the pursuit of your own happiness or well-being. What is notable about the preamble, in contrast to Locke's writings, was Jefferson's decision to exchange the right of property for the phrase pursuit of happiness. One explanation for Jefferson's modification may be, this was as an important and awkward issue because nobody claimed that the American Indians, though primitive, had no natural rights. The admission of a natural right to property would have put under suspicion virtually all land held by descendants of European settlers in America. Also contentious was the matter of a natural right to property in relation to the legitimacy of slavery. Within the natural state of man, Bartolomacchi made a distinction between the primitive, original state created by God and adventitious states where man is placed by his own acts. The property of goods is one such adventitious state. If Jefferson and his colleagues realized that the designation of property as an unalienable human right would be politically unwise, it was Bartolomacchi who had shown that it was also philosophically unjustified. Peter Garnsey in Thinking About Property. Whether the choice of words was stylistic in nature or based on a need to separate the document from the treatment of the Indian populations of the region, the language is compelling and offers a rosy vision for the purpose of America's new government, one in which the people of the new nation would be free to pursue a life all their own with little interference from a tyrannical government. Following the best-known line of the Declaration is one of its most important. It lays out what government is supposed to be and do, and defends the right of the people to rebel if government breaks its contract with those it governs. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. In these lines, Jefferson argues that the government falls under the control of the people, not the other way around. Once that social contract between the two parties is broken by the men placed in power by the people, then the people have the absolute and legitimate right, and more importantly, the responsibility to cast off the oppressive government and create a new one which will carry out its ultimate responsibility of protecting the rights of the individual. To fully understand this concept, it's necessary to understand the idea of a zero-sum game. In this situation, any powers gained by the government must result in an equal loss of rights amongst the people. Every time the British king assumed new powers, the colonists lost rights that they had not only grown accustomed to, but that they believed they had every God-given right to possess. As the king usurped more power, they felt that a pattern had been set and that usurpations would continue in the future. If enough usurpations were to take place, the people would be left with few, if any, rights. And to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Once this new nation has been established, it is the people who will create a new government, one which they believe is appropriate to their values, beliefs, culture, and strengths, and one which will also work to protect those rights which they believe to be guaranteed by God. In the next line, Jefferson segues back to one of the topics from the preamble, that when government is cast off, those forming the new government must provide plain and simple reasons for doing so. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. He then goes on to say, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. To break this down into simpler language, it means that people will generally tend to put up with hardships until those hardships become so unbearable that they have no choice but to take action and rebel against the sovereign. Following the section on natural rights, Jefferson begins going through a list of abuses, presenting those reasons to all of the other nations of the world for judgment as to why the colonists feel that they have been left with only one course of action. And in the last paragraph, Jefferson declares the independence of a new nation. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The 56 men who signed their name to this document knew that they were taking a great risk. What they had just done was to commit treason against the King of England. If they were ever caught, they would be hanged. They were so fervent about their cause that they ignored all the risks, and in doing so established one of the world's great nations.